Everybody for staying after the break, and also thanks Pascal and Jack for giving me the podium here, so I can have this comparison between Ethereum and Rchain. I think before I start, my presentation will be a bit shorter than the one of Jack, which I think has two reasons. The first one, that I don't have to dive too deep anymore into the fundamentals of Ethereum, because Jack covered it already very well. And the other one is that Rchain as a protocol is just much less immature than both EOS and Ethereum. So in that sense, there are just many open questions. So it's more difficult to do a comparison anyway. So if in 1 year Rchain is actually a mature platform and they plan to launch in the first quarter of 2019 with their mainnet, we can do another comparison side by side, which then might be longer than the one which I'm doing right now. It's about me, my education. I'm currently finishing my Master of Science in Digital Currencies. I did some courses to do for Ethereum development. I'm actually not a programmer by education, so I have my bachelor's in economics and finance. But for the last 1.5 years, I really did a lot of programming, and I mainly focus on smart contracts. So actually, at the moment, I'm rather confident, at least for the smart contract and blockchain part in programming. At the moment, I'm employed at Axveco, which is a small consultancy firm in Amsterdam. We do a lot on blockchain, but we also do other things. But there, I am actually doing everything on blockchain. And yeah, so I'm employed with Inblock.io actually to do things for Rchain. So in that sense, I'm not as unbiased as Jack was, but for this presentation, I don't get paid. And I'm working on making a DAO, which I call the Super DAO. So you can look it up on GitHub and also follow me on LinkedIn, I think is the best. So about this presentation, what else? Yeah, so the outline, first I do a side-by-side comparison, so just everything side by side. Then I'll dive deeper into what exactly is the computational model behind Rchain, because I think this computational model is actually what really sets it apart. So I just spent a lot of time on actually showing you how this computational model works, and then afterwards we can go back to the first side-by-side comparison if you have more questions, and I can answer actually any question there. And also interrupt me at any time if you have questions, that's fine. Alright, so the side-by-side comparison. This is a lot, and I think actually you can't see it from here, right? So maybe I should... Can you see it?
It's readable.
Yeah? Alright, so just as Jack, I kind of split it up in a couple of blocks, and there's 5. The first one is about usability. So the block time in Ethereum is 10 to 15 seconds, but actually in Rchain, it's a bit ambiguous what is exactly the block time. And actually at the moment in the testnet, I think you could say it's kind of the economic decision of validators. Like validators, they're free to batch transactions or to send transactions out to the network whenever they appear. So it's not really defined. There's no such real thing as a block time or something in Rchain. Then the transaction throughput. Currently, Rchain is, well, we don't have a stable testnet. They advertise as they would have transaction throughputs magnitudes more than Ethereum. I think at this point, at least with testnets, it's not really feasible to say that. I would say it's more kind of Ethereum size when it comes to transaction throughput. Unsharded, I'll come to that later. Rchain is, at least theoretically, very good to shard. Account abstraction, that's something which is really special in Rchain. You don't have that neither in EOS and in Ethereum. Rchain doesn't have accounts, so there is not natively inside the protocol such a thing as public keys and private keys, which is very strange if you talk about that with people, but there is no such thing. There are processes, and that's actually the other part of the access rights. It's based on an object capability paradigm, so there's processes, and these processes, they have certain rights, and these rights are being given from within these processes. So that's something really different. We can do accounts, but it's another layer. So it's not in the base layer to have this accounting function, to have these accounts. Consensus, Rchain is implementing the Casper correct by construction protocol, and we're actually working very closely together with Vlad Zamvir, who is main research also for Ethereum, who implements this branch of the proof of work. Ethereum currently proof of work, but as Jack said, they will migrate to proof of stake. So access rights, I defined that, and I'll come to that later also in the presentation. And there's an interesting thing, the per shard policy. So when Ethereum is going to shard, at the moment it's not sharded, still the policies of every shard is being enforced by like the main protocol. So the main protocol defines how all the validators in every shard will behave, right? In Rchain, it's up to the shard's validators to define the policy from within their shards. So in Rchain you can have shards which are private. I as a validator can say, I'm the only person who can transact in this shard. Or I can say, the blocks in my shard must be very big or very small, or the transaction throughput is higher or smaller. This is super flexible in Rchain, so you can have the policy of every shard is kind of up to the validators to define. Yeah, but also that, again, that's the idea, and theoretically it works, but the practical implementation is still unclear at this point. Then the virtual machine, Ethereum has the Ethereum virtual machine. They indeed might move to EOWASM. Rchain implements the Rho virtual machine, which I'll come to that later, what it is. But it's a non-native virtual machine, so it's an abstraction of the Java VM. Concurrency is kind of the feature to have multiple processes, multiple things happening at the same time, influencing each other on the fly, which is a very special feature of Rchain. Rchain has it, Ethereum doesn't. They have to do everything sequential, so one after the other. Cost model, a bit unclear. In Rchain, Ethereum, it's per opcode. Smart contract language in Rchain is Roland, which is a completely strange language. Like it takes you a while to get into that. Ethereum is like JavaScript,
Is that a functional language, Roland?
It's a process calculus language, so it's not comparable. If you want, I can show you, but it's very funny if you like it. But it is really strange. It's based on message passing, which is actually also the special thing of Rchain. The storage model in Rchain is a tuple space, and what's a tuple space is an associative memory storage, which basically means that you can. I'll come to that later, but it's also one of the very special points of Rchain. Ethereum is mentioned, smart contract expressiveness. You can express a lot in this Roland language. I think much more than in Ethereum, much more than in any other programming language, but again, it's a bit strange. Ethereum is Turing complete. So within Rchain, you can query the global state of the whole protocol from within the smart contracts. So you could say, for example, you all know Ethereum. So in Ethereum, in Rchain, if you could say, if a token is being produced, which is having this name and which is having this initial balance, then do something like that. So before this token even gets produced, you can just make certain statements about the whole state, and if these statements are being met, then you can do certain actions. So you can kind of query the global state from within your smart contracts. And there's actually also not really such a thing as a sandbox smart contracts in Rchain. Then the behavioral type system, which is kind of that you can define, given a certain state and given a certain program, what will be the outcome of that. So you can define behavior of contracts. It's really interesting, but also very mathematical and difficult. I don't fully understand it myself, but you could do that in Rchain, not at the moment, but in the future it will be possible. In Ethereum it's not possible. Implementations, Rchain has currently one implementation, which is maybe Scala. Ethereum has multiple, I think over 10, which I think is really good for Ethereum, and they are growing. And for Rchain, it's one, and I think at this point at least there's no plans. The community wants to, but for the moment it's one. Organization, Rchain has a cooperative model, which means that all the members, they come together, you have to go through KYC and then you get a vote, and if you have a vote you can influence the way Rchain cooperative is spending the funds. And Ethereum is kind of loosely organized, like we have the Ethereum Foundation, but there's not really a kind of real model behind it, and Rchain in that sense is more tightly organized around this cooperative model. Yeah, so there was a side-by-side comparison, and yeah, again, I think it's very difficult to do actually this side-by-side comparison, but I still tried because I knew what Jack was going to talk about, so I felt that I had to do it just to be fair as well. Okay, and then in this talk, I will focus a bit more on the virtual machine, about the concurrency, smart contracting language, the storage model, and then the queryability of the six. So actually all these things which are kind of funky and weird of Rchain, so you get a more feeling about what it means. Okay, so the row computational model. And what is row? It means reflective higher order. You can read the paper where it's actually defined. So it's based on a theory of names and processes, also called process calculus, and it's already around since the 1980s. It's not really something new, but and what it means, reflections, means that names can be turned into processes, and I come to that later, what exactly are names and what are processes. And a higher order, it means that processes themselves can be communicated as messages. So about names and processes, I thought give an example. We all know this is Amsterdam, right? And in Rchain we would define this like a name. Like the name is Amsterdam, it's the location, it's a place where things happen, right? And then what are processes? Well, in Amsterdam we have tourism, and I think I heard today that the I Amsterdam letters are being removed, right? Yeah? Okay, no, that's a shame. So in Amsterdam we have tourism, and we have the trade, and we have the business, and these are processes. And I think importantly, the processes, they always happen on a name. So a process is always bound to a name. But a name doesn't necessarily need to have processes. So this is kind of your mental model which you can have when I talk about names and processes. And then the tuple space, as I said, is associative memory storage, means that it's content addressable, so you can kind of filter. You can say on this name, when process is there which has this behavior, then do something like that. So you can address the content by its kind of behavior, right? And I visualize it kind of as a box, and where names, where processes live on like a name, and also known as channels. Name and channel is the same. And then to show you, you can visualize a tuple space as something like this. So it's just a lot of names, and here you have a name A to B, and well, there are many more, but this could be a mental representation of the tuple space. We have all these names here living there, and then what are processes? Processes are actually very basically in two forms. So you have listen on a channel or a name, and when you receive a message, then do something, and there's something we call P. Or you have sent a message on the channel. And then we can come back to, again, the tuple space. So you have these names, and on these names, these processes live, right? And I do it again. So you have the names, and as I said, on these names, these processes live. So the processes that live on the name, and not all the processes, not all the names need to have assigned processes. And processes, they are in the form of send a message on the channel, and when I receive a message on the channel, then do something which is continuation. Okay, so then we have a COM event. COM event, well, you have the tuple space, and then I'm going to define a message. And this message, in this case, is send the message hello roles on the channel A. And then, if you would define this in row line, you would say it like this. So this is like the channel on which you're sending it, like at channel A. And this means send, and this is just a message. Well, let's see that. So we're sending this message on channel A, and then, oh, boom, that's like a COM event. The COM event, language, right? So, boom. So, a send and a receive comes together. And when a send and a receive, just in real life, when I send something to you, you listen it, right, and we're having a communication. And this is the same in Rchain. And more importantly, if the communication happens, both messages are away, and what is left is the continuation. And this continuation, well, we have to define it. So this continuation could be, for example, to send the message on the standard out channel, which is just print the message to the terminal. And you would do it like that, send out message. And then the result on your terminal would be hello world. So this is really basic idea of how Rchain, how the tuple space works, and how you can actually interact with it. Okay, so, and now more formally, processes, they are in the form, well, we have one process, which is do nothing. Then the other process, and I think we got it already. So when you're listening on the channel, and when you receive a certain message in this sense, it is you listen on channel Y, and you call the message X, and when you receive a message on channel Y, then trigger the continuation and binds Y to the free name X. That's basically what it means, yeah?
Is the channel the most similar thing to a contract on Ethereum? Like you send a message to a channel, and then it does a process.
So a channel, I think, in Rchain will be most comparable in Ethereum to kind of address, because you're always sending something to this channel.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the address itself is being defined by its own content. I come to that later, but yeah. So this one we got covered already. This one we also got covered. So this means send a message, and we call this P. So actually, it's a process itself. So you send the process on the channel X. And we saw it already. This one means do process P and Q concurrently of each other. And I put a thing in front of it because I think we've seen it also already. Because I showed you the big tuple space, and I showed also that there are actually many processes living there on this one tuple space. And all these processes, they're just being there, and they can be influenced all at the same time. So that's what it means when I say to do things concurrently. So you have all these processes, and they're just living at the same time, and they can influence each other on the fly. This one is kind of the termination process, so just do nothing. So I put also this thing in front of it because it's the most easy one. And the last two things I didn't cover, so I'll do a little bit more slides so you can see these as well. So asterisk X means to evaluate, I'll go to that later. So just tell a bit more about processes, just recap. So process is always in the form on the channel, send something, or on the channel, listen, and when you get something, then do the continuation. Or one process can also be in the form of everything concurrently. So I can define these separately as three processes on the demo, but if you get them as a whole, that's also one process, right? So, I should have here. So one process can also be P bar Q. So one process can also be P bar Q bar X. So these are three forms of what a process could be. Names can be like this, but names can also be like this. And I think this is a very important one. So again, so what you see here, actually this A or the B or the C, just themselves, it is a process, because a string is a process, is a very primitive type of a process in Rchain. But just because you put this add in front of it, you make the process a name. Yeah.
Could you maybe give like an example of how two users like us
Yeah.
would use this and what a name is and what a process is in that case?
Okay. So very simple calculator. I define a calculator on a certain name. I call it name calculator, just string calculator. And I have a couple of processes living on a calculator. What do I need? I need adder, a subtraction, and a getter.
Mm-hmm.
So I define on this name a couple of processes. And when a person sends me something and it puts something like add, like a method add, or it says sub, then within this name, the add or the sub gets executed because that's what the user tells them. So these are like the processes, and these processes, they are bound to the name, but because every process must be called in a different way, even though they're on the same name, and that's like the pattern matching of Rchain. You can do many different processes on the same channel, and then, well,
So what's the difference between the name and a process? What's the channel fit in? So the name is the name, the process are like the functions that get executed. What's the channel?
that's like the location where it lives. Like you have to address.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. An address.
Yeah.
Sorry, where is the timestamp for processes?
There's no timestamp in Rchain.
Are they blocks?
Yeah, there are blocks, but we at this point we don't know timestamps. Also not by the block reducers.
You have block numbers.
Yeah.
So you have block time.
As I said, it's not. There's no block time defined in Rchain.
Block time is like what block number you're up to.
Yeah, but there's no certain. We don't have 3 seconds block time or something.
No,
That's kind of up to the validators.
Block time is the time that blocks know about. They don't know about real world time. They just know what block number it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like block time.
Okay, so you have that time.
Consequence
Yeah.
of the blocks. But if you don't have timestamp, how you arrange the processes?
That's a very interesting one, and a very good one as well. So I just give. Yeah, I was actually hoping for this question to be there. So let's say this one. This can actually be executed in 2 different ways, right? You have 2 listenings and you have 1 sending. And as I said, when there's a listen and a send at the same channel, they come together and you have the call event, right? But here, there's 2 possible ways how you can resolve this. So you can couple this one with this one and this one with this one. And Rchain doesn't define which one is good, which one is bad. It only says that there must be a valid com event. So then it's up to the validators, in this case, to define which one gets executed and which one not. So there is kind of this, well, you don't know as just a user how this one will be executed. But so you also don't know, sometimes in Ethereum, how stuff gets executed, but at least here it's completely clear. It's completely in the open that this is not always clear, and actually it's a very useful feature to have this. Yeah, so then again, I told this, so these are also examples of names. So this is an example of names, but this is also an example of a name. So these are just the processes. So just this is a process, but if you put an @ sign in front of the process, you make it a name. So actually, the names themselves are being defined by the processes which live on that name. Something like that. And if you put an asterisk, so a dereference in front of the name, you get the process back. So there's this, from a name you can go to a process, and from a process you can again go to a name. Which is like, you can do very interesting things with that in smart contracts. So dereferencing a name makes it a process.
So when you say a smart contract, which part of this is the smart contract?
I would say the processes themselves. Yeah, so the processes themselves is defining what happens when you send a message to the name.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no process living on a name, so if I send something, so I define a send on a name, and there's no receive, and the receive themselves is also a process, and there's no receive also living on that name, nothing will happen. My send will just stay there until it gets met with another receive. And at that point, so the send is a process and the receive is a process, and when they match, something happens. Yeah. Okay, so that was, I think, was like for those who are new to Rchain, is completely mind blowing, and it was also for me when I first heard about Rchain. I think it took me about 2 weeks to actually grasp my head around that. So I also don't expect you to, at this point, really understand what Rchain is about, and I also on purpose left like the fine details out of it. But what I hoped that you at least got from this is that Rchain is a whole different beast, I think. And I think that also got me interested in Rchain in the first place, because it is so different that even though it is something which is by far not as mature as Ethereum, but it is something different, and it is something which at least, and I'll show you now one example, has some very theoretical ways which makes it very much suited for blockchain context. So I can show you one name just to give you a bit of an idea why this thing, which I just explained to you, might be beneficial in blockchain context. Yeah?
Can there be multiple processes under one name?
Yes. Yeah, you can have as many. Yeah.
How do you dedifferentiate them? You go to any process has its own name?
Yeah, so it's the pattern matching. So here, you say, so this one is listen, right? So you're like listening on the channel, and here, so this is actually pattern matching. So here you just say, I want this message to be of the form X, so I want this message to be a name. But you could also say this name themselves is a quoted process. So you could also pattern it against like a different, so you could only resolve, you could, for example, resolve only this message on this channel if it is in the form of sending something. Like that will be possible. But it's very strange. But you have different ways. Not all sends and not all receives, even though they are on the same channel, are being matched together. You can do some things here, which is kind of pattern matching, so you don't necessarily always have to resolve every send and receive on the same channel. But I'll be happy to show you some things, how actually you make a ERC20 standard in Rchain, which is one of the things I'm actually working on at the moment. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief drop about how you would use this computational model and sharding. And I think if you follow the previous slides, you can at least theoretically come with me. So you have to remember that names can be turned into processes and around, right? So just an example, you have a name which is at A, and in fact it's like a quoted process from the process A. So you have the process A, and putting the at in front of it makes it a name. So the processes, they all happen concurrently from each other, so they all happen at the same time, and they can influence each other on the fly. So P bar Q can be seen as one process called P, for example. And actually the tuple space is one big process, so you have process P, process Q, etc. I showed you this. Which is actually a very intuitive notion of sharding. I'll show you why. So this could be the Rchain tuple space, and I showed it to you in a couple of slides before. Process P, Q, how many processes we want to have. But we could also call it Rchain shard A, for example. And we will put a par in front of it, and we define another blockchain, aka shard, called process B. And then another shard, we can call it process, well, etc. And actually, all these shards or blockchains from themselves can be taken together, as all processes can be taken together to form one more process. So this is a very intuitive notion in Rchain how you can define shards. But again, Rchain, this works. I've been playing around a lot with the Rchain, with the language of Rchain, but actually to set up a whole network which is up and running is very difficult. So the theoretical model to me sounds very appealing, but to execute on that, it proves to be very difficult.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Short question there with regards to that setup. How does that kind of interact with, and it's maybe a question with regards to Ethereum too,
Mhm.
is how does that interact with like the right to be forgotten? Because it's obviously very, very interesting with regards to like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, you can place the sensitive or time sensitive information in the shard, and then the shard eventually disappears. Does
Mhm.
that flexibility help or hinder that type of situation?
I don't know exactly about the right to be forgotten. I think in the blockchain context, it's anyways very difficult, right? But I know that Rchain intends to implement things as a renting model. So then you could put the process on a certain name, and it will disappear if your rent gets out. But again, that's something like far in the future. They're not there yet.
Well,
Yeah, the right to be forgotten. I think it's difficult anyways to resolve both for Rchain and Ethereum.
yeah, of course, difficult to align all types of blockchain things with GDPR and these types of
Yeah.
rules and regulations.
But Rchain doesn't solve that.
Well,
No.
yeah.
Okay. So, which brings me to the conclusion. Comparing Ethereum and Rchain with each other is like, in my opinion, a bit of comparing apples and oranges, which in the first hand also made me so much interested in Rchain. Because it's really this orange, which is so funky and weird, and it takes you, like, it's a mind blow when you finally understand how it works. And it's really interesting. But to make this side-by-side comparison, I would say you have Ethereum and you have EOS, and then you have somewhere here you have Rchain. It's really different. Okay, so you have the different computational model, which leads to like a very different approach to what are smart contracts and actually the blockchain. And the theoretical concept of Rchain, I think, is very promising, but in reality there are still many hurdles to overcome, and we'll see in 1 year where Rchain is. So that's it. And, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Pascal.
I still feel stupid. Where should I go to? What's
So
the best online resource?
I think it's best just to play around with if you're a programmer, just to play around with actually Rchain, which is this language. And you can go to, it's a very nice example. Just Google it. Learn Rchain, Rchain co-op, and that will be good. Yeah. That's a fun way. It's like crypto zombies. Yeah, crypto zombies. But then for Rchain, and that's really fun to do. Yeah. Please.
Is the big kind of value of Rchain is that it shards well?
Sorry.
Is that the big?
That it was?
What's like the biggest value proposition that sets it apart? Not in terms of how it works, but in terms of what it makes better.
Yeah. So I think the way that you can define all these smart contracts concurrently from each other is very appealing for scalability. Also, you can have on one node, you can have what I said. Like you can have a blockchain. Every shard can be different in terms of how you configure it. So you can have a public, private, and a consortium shard on the same node, but on the same blockchain, right? And you can have different shards. You can say this shard is for a lot of data, and this shard is just for a lot of really quick. And this you can is very flexible.
Can a process trigger another process?
Yeah. So that's actually the process calculus. Process calculus is nothing more than passing messages around. So we have this send and the receive, and it's really like.
How does it handle concurrency if different contracts or processes are triggering other processes which are actually changing state as you're running?
Yeah. Okay. So that is kind of this slide, right? So the previous is this one. This one. So this can be resolved in a couple of ways because you have here a send and a receive on the same channel. But it's up to the validators to decide which one gets resolved. And in this case, there can only be one resolution. because once, for example, this one got matched with this one, this send will disappear and this send will also disappear, and the only thing which will be left is continuation, and then you only have a listen. It's there, like it's a valid resolution, but it's up to the validators to decide. Yeah. More questions?
So even on a kind of like more practical level, for instance, like if you would be a developer, like what type of use case would you decide to maybe go for Rchain instead of like Ethereum, for instance?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer. Honestly, I wouldn't advise any developer at this point to do any serious project on Rchain. Because that's just not the current state. Watch out what it does in 5 months, maybe 10 months. But if you're that kind of developer who likes to do funky things and experience new languages, then I would do this because it's very, very new and very funky. So it's fun to learn, to play around. Yeah.
Actually, it's just a comment. I'm not expert with sharding, but it is quite complex idea.
Yeah.
So you are a little bit seem very ambitious about sharding, that multiple rules, multiple shards in the same node, and maybe you also you didn't mention, but maybe it is also about interoperability among shards. So that's a very, very challenging.
Yeah, it is. But you have to realize that this is a computational model, which is something which is different from the mathematical foundations up to the top. So it's really something completely different. And if you have a completely different model, problems which are a problem in one kind of paradigm are suddenly very easy, and we're foreseeing other problems. So that's the case for Rchain, I think. Yeah.
What do you think will be the biggest problems or challenges?
Oh, the biggest problem and challenge, I think, at the moment is actually to get the network live and up and running, and there's many bottlenecks, and it's actually very hard to program a blockchain, and there are so many things which you have to find out. What I said, like we don't have current stable testnet at the moment, and that's just because it's very hard to make that. Even though the theoretical concept is sound and very simple in its principles, if you want to put it on a blockchain context, it's just difficult. And to manage this cooperation, I think at the moment we're also facing some difficulties with the Rchain co-op. They made some bad decisions. The project is kind of being delayed because of that. But then again, Ethereum also had these problems when they started up. So we have to see.
Why was almost all money moved to that new debt?
Sorry?
Like the corporated, they moved like a lot of money, almost all money in-house to their debt.
You're referring some thing which happened, or what?
Yeah, they raised some amount of money, and recently I think they moved.
It's the investment that Greg did.
Yeah, they
okay.
moved like 23
Oh,
million
yeah.
or something to their debt. Wow.
Oh, okay. That is one of these
other
examples
issues
of
with
which I mentioned of the governance. Greg Meredith, which is actually the inventor of the row calculus, he's a real scientist. I think he's a genius, but he is currently leading the cooperative, and he made a couple of decisions which are maybe not so smart to do. And one of them was indeed to invest a lot of money on a DApp, which is immersive audio, right? So I mean, yeah. Yeah, but I don't know why. Yeah, we have to guess. So, thanks. If there are no more questions.
Yeah. Cool guys, so there's nothing else in the program and there's nothing around